Michael had been gone for 4 days when the silence in the house became unbearable. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt peaceful or restful, it was the kind that echoed. The kind that reminded Claire just how alone she had become in her own marriage. She had gotten used to it, or at least pretended to. The empty seat at the dinner table. The unread messages. The one-word replies. And worst of all, the absence of warmth in their once vibrant home. They used to talk about everything. Even the little things. But lately, Michael came home with tired eyes and a distracted mind. Always glued to his phone, always preoccupied with something more important. Claire didn't blame him entirely, he worked hard, but a part of her wished he would just look at her again. The way he used to. Friday night came, and with it, a chill in the air. Claire stood by the window, watching the wind rustle the trees. Her phone buzzed with a message from Amber. Jason's in town. You should invite him over for the weekend. It'll be fun. You need company. Claire hesitated. Jason was Michael's closest friend from college. There used to be a trio of laughter, late-night takeout, and spontaneous road trips. Jason was charming, always a little reckless, but he had a way of making people feel seen. It had been years since Claire had been around someone who made her feel that way. She stared at the blinking cursor in the message box for a while before typing, "Sure. Why not?" Jason arrived just after 8, his smile still boyish, his energy somehow unchanged despite the years. He brought wine and stories from his travels. They sat on the couch, sipping and laughing, the tension of Claire's week slowly unraveling with each passing minute. She had forgotten how easy it was to talk to him. How he asked questions and actually listened. "You've changed," he said, looking at her over the rim of his glass. "How so?" she asked, half laughing, suddenly self-conscious. "You seem quieter. Sad, maybe. I don't know. You used to light up rooms." Claire looked away, swallowing the compliment like a bitter pill. People change. Not always by choice. They paused. The fire in the living room crackled faintly, and the space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Claire shook her head lightly and stood up. "I'll get more wine." In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breath. This was harmless. Just catching up. A friend keeping her company while her husband was away. That was all. Jason followed, placing his empty glass on the counter beside her. "Remember that night in college? The one where we ended up lost in that tiny town?" Claire laughed, grateful for the change in direction. "How could I forget? You thought the goat in the road was a sign from the universe." "It was. We never would have found that diner otherwise." "True," she said. "You always found magic in the chaos." Jason tilted his head, watching her more closely now. "You know, I used to have the biggest crush on you." Claire blinked. The air shifted. "What?" she asked, half smiling, unsure if he was joking. "Yeah," he continued casually, as if they were still in their early 20s. "Back when we all lived in that tiny apartment. I had a whole plan to ask you out. Then Michael beat me to it." Claire didn't know what to say. A part of her wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it was just nostalgia. Another part, the one that hadn't been touched or held or truly seen in months, felt something stir. "That was a long time ago," she finally said. "Doesn't mean I forgot." There was a pause, and then Claire gently pulled her hand away from the wine bottle, brushing against Jason's fingers. It was barely a touch, but it felt electric. She glanced at him quickly, then looked away. "I should probably head to bed," she said, voice quieter now. "Of course," Jason replied, stepping back, his eyes lingering on her face. "Thanks for letting me crash here. It's been good seeing you again." She nodded, heart thudding as she walked past him and up the stairs. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, the laughter and lingering words still echoing in her ears. She tried to brush it off, telling herself nothing happened. That this was just a nice evening with an old friend. She changed into her sleep shirt, turned off the light, and crawled under the covers. Her mind raced. Why did he have to say that? Why did it feel like something was waiting? She stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance from the hallway light still bleeding in through the door. She didn't feel tired. If anything, she felt more awake than she had in weeks. At 2 a.m., a soft knock broke the silence. She froze. It was faint, almost hesitant. Then another knock. Claire sat up, her breath catching. She got up slowly and crossed the room, each step feeling like a decision. She opened the door just a crack. Jason stood there, shirtless, a glass of water in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low. Claire didn't answer. She opened the door a little wider. And the night quietly tipped into something she would never be able to take back. Claire hesitated at the doorway, heart thudding in her chest like a warning bell. Jason stood there, barefoot, holding that glass of water like it was a perfectly valid reason to be outside her room at 2 a.m. She couldn't read his face, but she felt the energy pulsing in the narrow space between them, something charged, something unspoken. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Jason said. "Just couldn't sleep. The guest beds, not great." Claire tried to smile, but it came out uneven. She didn't move aside, yet she didn't shut the door either. Jason glanced down the hallway, then back at her. "Can I just sit in here for a bit? Talk? Like we used to?" She wanted to say no. She should have said no. But her loneliness spoke louder than her conscience. "Just for a bit," she whispered, stepping back. He walked in quietly, careful not to make a sound. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a small bedside lamp. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, and Jason lowered himself onto the floor, resting his back against the side of it. "I missed this," he said after a few seconds of silence. "Not the situation, obviously. But just being around you." Claire's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. "Yeah. Me too." Jason looked up at her, his expression softened. "You really doing okay, Claire? You seemed off tonight." She hesitated. There was a weight in her chest that had been building for months, maybe years. She exhaled slowly. "Michael's been distant for a while," she admitted. "Even when he's here, it feels like he's not. We don't talk. We don't touch. It's like living with a stranger." Jason didn't speak, just listened. That was what made it worse, how easy it was to talk to him, how his silence didn't feel empty. "He used to notice things," she continued. "The way I curled my hair. When I wore a new dress. The way I smiled when I saw him. Now it's like I could vanish and he wouldn't even blink." Jason shifted slightly, still watching her from the floor. "You shouldn't feel invisible, Claire. Not in your own life." His words hit harder than they should have. Claire felt something tighten in her throat. He reached up and gently placed a hand on her knee. Just a small gesture. Warm. Familiar. Dangerous. Claire looked down at him, her eyes meeting his. "What are we doing?" she asked, voice cracking. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I know I've thought about this moment more times than I should admit." She felt her pulse in her fingertips, in her neck, in her chest. Jason stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. He stood close, too close. Claire didn't move. "I told myself I'd never cross that line," he said. "Not with you. Not ever." "But you're here," she whispered. He leaned in slightly. Close enough that she could feel his breath. "Do you want me to leave?" She didn't answer. He leaned forward just enough to press his forehead against hers. Claire's hands gripped the edge of the bed. Her breathing was shallow. Then, slowly, he kissed her. It was soft at first. Hesitant. Like both of them were waiting for the other to pull away. But neither did. Claire kissed him back, her hands moving to his shoulders. The taste of wine still lingered on his lips. His hand slid up to her cheek, cradling her face with a kind of reverence that made her ache. The kiss deepened. His body pressed against hers. She felt his need, his restraint, his hesitation all melt away with each breath. Her conscience screamed at her, but her body silenced it. They moved together slowly, unsurely, like crossing into forbidden territory with every touch. The bed creaked softly beneath them, sheets shifting as limbs intertwined. There were no words, just breath, skin, and a shy silence that spoke louder than any confession could. For a moment, Claire felt seen again. Desired. Real. She had forgotten what that felt like. After, Jason lay beside her, chest rising and falling in the dim glow of the lamp. Claire stared at the ceiling, wide awake, the rush of what just happened crashing into her like waves. She sat up, pulling the sheet tighter around herself. Jason turned to her. "Are you okay?" Claire didn't answer at first. She couldn't look at him. The weight of what they'd done hung heavy in the air between them. I don't know what that was, she whispered. But it can't happen again. Jason nodded slowly. I know. He sat up, pulling his shirt over his head in silence. I didn't come here for this, he said, his voice low. I swear. But I meant what I said earlier. You deserve more than the way he treats you. Claire looked at him, eyes glassy. That doesn't make this right. No. It doesn't. Jason stood and quietly gathered his things. Before leaving the room, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, I never stopped seeing you. Then he stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind him. Claire sat there, frozen. Her skin still warm, her thoughts screaming. She wrapped the sheet tighter around her body like it could shield her from what just happened. The clock on her nightstand read 3:17 a.m. She curled up under the covers, but sleep didn't come. Only silence. Only guilt. Only the echo of a man who had no right to love her the way she had longed for. The sun was barely up when Claire opened her eyes. It wasn't the alarm that woke her, it was the heaviness pressing into her chest. A weight that hadn't been there the day before. For a moment, she forgot. For a moment, everything felt still and clean. Then she turned her head and saw the other side of the bed, empty, rumpled, and undeniably used. The memories came back in sharp flashes. Jason's mouth on hers. The heat of his skin. The way he looked at her afterward, not with lust, but something gentler, more painful. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheets over herself as though they could somehow cover what had happened. Her bedroom door was closed now. Had he done that when he left? She got up, moving through the room like a ghost, gathering her clothes, slipping into them without looking in the mirror. She didn't want to see her own face. Downstairs, the house was quiet. She could hear Jason moving around in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, the gentle hiss of the coffee machine. The ordinary sounds felt surreal now, like they didn't belong to this world anymore. Claire paused halfway down the stairs, one hand on the banister, heart in her throat. He was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. His back was to her, but he must have heard her footsteps because he glanced over his shoulder. Morning, he said, carefully. She didn't respond right away. She walked to the kitchen island and sat down on one of the stools. Her arms folded tightly across her chest. Jason set a mug in front of her, then sat across from her, both hands wrapped around his own. I didn't sleep much, he said quietly. Claire stared at the steam rising from the mug. Me neither. They sat in silence for a long time. Not awkward, exactly. Just fragile. I'm not going to pretend last night didn't happen, Jason said finally. But I also don't expect you to explain yourself. Claire looked up at him. I don't know how to explain it anyway. Jason nodded. You don't have to. She rubbed her fingers across her forehead, trying to focus. I don't even know what this means. What we did, what I did, it wasn't supposed to happen. I know. She leaned back, exhaling shakily. It wasn't about you. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. It was about me. About how empty I've been feeling. About not recognizing my own life anymore. Jason looked down, his jaw tight. I get it. More than you think. I'm married, she said, her voice barely audible. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I didn't come here to mess things up for you, Claire. I swear I didn't. I believe you, she whispered. Jason reached across the table, letting his fingers brush against hers. It was tentative, barely a touch. Maybe this was a mistake, he said, but I don't regret seeing you again. You mattered to me. She pulled her hand away gently. That's the problem. A car horn sounded faintly in the distance. The real world creeping in. Claire stood up, cradling her coffee mug in both hands. I need some time, she said, not meeting his eyes. Jason nodded, understanding in his expression even if it hurt. I'll get out of your hair. You don't have to leave right away. He gave a soft, sad smile. I think I do. They didn't say goodbye. Not really. He gathered his things, loaded them into his car, and drove off while she watched through the living room window. She didn't cry, but something inside her felt like it was quietly collapsing. Later that day, Claire opened her phone and saw a message from Michael. Hope the house isn't too quiet without me. I miss you. Back tomorrow night. She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to say me too. She wanted to say I'm sorry. She wanted to say something that could erase what had happened the night before. But nothing came. She typed love you, and hit send. The words looked strange. Flat. Like they didn't belong to her anymore. The rest of the day passed slowly. She cleaned the kitchen twice, did laundry she didn't need to do, rearranged the bookshelves just to feel like she had control over something. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. Same position. Same silence. But everything had changed. The sheets still smelled faintly of him. She closed her eyes and tried to pretend that her heart wasn't aching in two directions at once. The next morning, she greeted Michael at the door with a practiced smile. He kissed her forehead and dropped his bags by the stairs. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just tired. He didn't press. He never did. She watched him move through the house, listened to him talk about meetings and airports and bad hotel coffee. It felt like listening to a stranger. That night, lying beside him, she closed her eyes and imagined a different version of her life. One where nothing happened. One where 2 a.m. was just another quiet hour of sleep. One where she didn't feel this twisted combination of guilt and longing. But it wasn't that version. It was this one. And she would carry that truth with her, tucked into the quiet spaces of her day, the look in Jason's eyes, the sound of his breath in the dark, the way it all felt so wrong and yet so real. Claire didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would confess, or if she'd take this secret to her grave. All she knew was that something inside her had woken up at 2 a.m., and it wasn't going back to sleep. Not anytime soon.